Good evening. Welcome everybody to Looking at Art in the Street, the Market. Tonight we have two special leaders in Los Angeles in the street art market, ManOne and Isabel Rojas-Williams. They have both been leaders in the community for a very, very long time, and they come to this street art from different disciplines, but in many ways, they overlap in their work. Tonight, we have just the very best of LA to talk about their background and their vision for the future, for the murals in Los Angeles and the street art market in general. I'm Eileen King from the Los Angeles Public Library, and my colleague Daniel Torres from the Edendale Library will join us in this conversation. Let's begin with the first slide. Go ahead, Edwin. This year, we've had, made possible by a grant from ALA and the National Endowment for the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan, a series of programs on street art. They have included graphic book displays, street art programs, and coming up next will be an LA Arts District tour. Our programs have been virtual, as this one is. We can go to the graphic book display. In the art atrium at Central Library, staff Nick and Mark put together all of the books that we have samplings from with street artists from Los Angeles. Their work is up in open space, which means you don't have to go to a gallery or museum to see it. We have about a collection of 300 books on street art from around the world. Well, let's get started with an introduction with ManOne. Next slide. I've known ManOne's work for some time, but only met him this year. He is an artist, curator, multi-award winning illustrator and mentor and entrepreneur. And I would add that his leadership in Los Angeles has been phenomenal. Every time I see him interacting with the public, I see the leadership qualities that bring him and his work to a wider audience. ManOne believes in the transformational power of art, its power to save lives and make the world a better place. Growing up, ManOne developed his love for art and his skills as a graffiti artist on the streets of LA. His art is comprised of his trademark bold and colorful art strokes. I have noticed over my time here in LA various themes and different kinds of murals that he has put up on the street for us, from tributes to graffiti writing to murals that tell a story of our neighborhood. Welcome, ManOne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm wondering if you could start with a little bit of your background of how you got involved in the street art market. What were the influences? What drove you to move from drawing to murals? And what were the knowledge and skills that served you best in creating your art that you have brought to the whole city of Los Angeles and beyond?
Cool. Well, thanks, Eileen, for that introduction and for having me here on this platform. We're really excited to be speaking to everybody out here. Yeah, so, born and raised in LA, I've noticed murals and, street work since I was a little kid, when I used to be holding my mom's hand and walking around Boyle Heights or East LA. I would see these gigantic murals. I had no idea how they were painted or who did them or anything. I was just impressed by the scale. And And I was already drawing. As a little kid, I was drawing and painting and stuff, since I can remember, actually. But it wasn't until I got into high school that, for whatever reason, graffiti all of a sudden, just like showed up big time. I was into hip hop, but I wanted to be a break dancer or a DJ, but I wasn't that good at breakdancing, and I didn't have the equipment to DJ. So all of a sudden, like, graffiti just popped out at me, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, And so I originally started by tagging on buses, because that was the way I got to school every day, was taking the bus. And that's actually how I got my first name, which I have, ManOne to this day. Was I was writing graffiti on the side of a bus, and on the inside of a bus, actually. And the guy who gave me the marker said, just don't put your real name, think of another name and write that. So I had headphones on, I was listening to Mantronics, which is a hip hop group from New York. And so I wrote Mantronics, and just every day on the bus, I would write Mantronics. But after a few weeks of doing it on the bus, I was itching to go do it outside, and do like real graffiti. And I quickly discovered that Mantronics was way too long. I'd probably get arrested by the time I got to the X. So I just shrunk it down to just the first 3 letters, which was Man. And so ManOne became my name. Man was my street name, but One is kind of like a copyright or trademark of your name. Like, there's no Man 2 or Man 10, it's just ManOne. So so that's where I got my name from. And as soon as I started doing graffiti on the streets with spray can and learning how to use the can, which at the time, learning to use a spray can took a long time. I mean, it took me over a year easily to figure out can control, because we had to figure out where to get the caps, what cans to use. Someone had to teach you. You just didn't. You could try it all day long, but it wasn't until I went down to Belmont Tunnel or places like that where I could watch other artists, like the first generation of LA graffiti writers, that I would see down there, and I would kind of like steal their little, tips on how they were doing certain things, like, oh, that's how you make a line, and that's how you make a shadow, and those kind of little things that you can't learn on your own. So it's a passed on kind of art form, and also, you got to know where to get the supplies, because back in the day, there was no internet or, online shops or anything like that. So you had to know where to get the certain caps and where to do this and where to do that. So anyways, nowadays, everything is a lot quicker, because there's a lot more information. You just, if you don't know how to spray paint, I bet you can YouTube it right now and figure it out. But back in the day, it wasn't like that. So that's kind of what it developed, was just all the graffiti around me.
There's nothing like hands-on experience watching somebody doing it to really pick up what's going on between the spray can and the canvas or wherever you're working.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's no other way to. You can try all you can, but when you see someone who knows what they're doing, you're like, oh, okay, I see what I have to go for, and then the other part of it was, even though I got into graffiti and I was running out in the middle of the night painting and doing all this other stuff, really what I wanted to do was do huge murals. I wanted to do huge colorful murals on the sides of buildings. I would have loved to do them on sides of subway trains, but we didn't have subway trains at the time, and we just had walls. But we have freeways, so we paint freeways to get our name out there to millions of people every day. We're a car culture in LA, so I remember just wanting to paint the biggest walls I could, because I would have the most eyeballs on it. And so to me, in my mind, we were just like the next part of the Chicano movement. That's the way I saw it. Even though a lot of my friends were Asian or black or white or whatever, I felt like we were part of that movement, because I saw the murals and the scale, and they spoke to me when I was a kid. And so I was like, okay, now it's my turn to speak to the next generation. And that's the way I've always felt about it. A lot of Chicano artists at the time didn't agree with that. but some did. And then nowadays, a lot of those guys are friends of mine, or I've got to know them or whatever. And I see that we are on the same level. We're all on the same kind of path in terms of being Latinos and Chicanos in LA.
Awesome. In terms of the books, when we get to the end of the program, if you would like a list of books, especially with the influence of the Chicano movement here in LA, you'll have an opportunity to respond to art@LAPL, and I'll send you out a list of books. I'm wondering if you had artists that you followed, ManOne, that inspired you to move on with your career.
Yeah, for sure. Early on, it was definitely graffiti artists were the ones that were inspiring me. And like I said, I started doing graffiti in 1987, and those later years of 87, of the 80s and the early 90s, I consider to be the second generation of LA graffiti writers. Like the first generation came around like the early 80s, 81, 82. And those are the guys that influenced me a lot. Now, also there's Chaz Bajorquez, who predates all that, who obviously is a good friend and totally inspired me, whatever, but he was like a Lone Ranger back then. But the hip hop graffiti that came from New York or from the East Coast, it arrived around the early 80s. So anyways, like, for example, Hex and Slick were two of my biggest influences. Hex was a really great, he still is, great artist. But he also started a hip hop shop on Melrose, which we used to go to. So he was one of the first like entrepreneurial graffiti artists that I ever saw. And when I later opened up my Crewes gallery, I had a lot of influence from what he did and what he was trying to do. And I kind of modeled a lot of it after him. And like I said, Slick was also an incredible artist, still is. So those were two guys that specifically, I was influenced by, but it's like a whole movement. It's hard to just say a couple people, because if I look at New York, my first graffiti Bible was spray can art, and that was by Jim Spragoff, rest in peace, and Henry Chalfant. And though that book really did a lot for a lot of us, because it showed us that graffiti was worldwide. It showed us that there was different styles. It showed us that, people were doing it just in different cities that we had no idea about. Before that was subway art, but subway art was cool, but we had no trains in LA. So it was like, okay, it's cool, but what can I do with this book except want to go to New York and paint trains? But spray can art was like, yeah, man, this is really cool. And, so we used all those kind of influences, so there's tons of graffiti writers, Fatura and Lee and Dondi and all these great graffiti writers from the East Coast, from New York, that I loved. But and obviously as I got more and more into art, I started learning more about los tres maestros from Mexico, and other muralists and painters and Picasso, and the list goes on and on. So I think as an artist, I think you have no choice but to be influenced and inspired by so many artists. It's like a language, and you want to read it as much as you can. So yeah, I'm still being inspired by all kinds of different artists.
And in terms of the gallery that you started, I just met a gentleman yesterday who came into the library and said, "Are you kidding? ManOne's going to be on a program?" I was in his first gallery, and the guy was so excited to reconnect with that experience. Can you tell us a little about that gallery and why you started it and how you got it going?
So the story behind it is I started Crewes Gallery first as a website in 2000. It was crewes.com. And the reason I started the website was because at the time, in the late 90s, I was getting a lot of work doing different projects or whatever. And I'd get a lot of requests to do things that I didn't do, like airbrushing or people wanted me to paint, airbrush a car or do graphic design or tattoos, stuff that I didn't know how to do or didn't want to do. And rather than keep pushing away the jobs and saying, no, I don't do that, I decided to embrace it. And I knew all these artists who did stuff like that. So like if someone needed a tattoo, I knew a tattoo artist. If someone needed airbrush work, I knew airbrush artists. So what I started doing is just being an online gallery for these artists, and I would promote them online. And when I would get calls for certain things, and I would farm off the project, and I'd take a 15% cut. And these other artists who didn't have to worry about marketing their skills were all of a sudden getting work. And it really showed me that there was a market for the type of art that we were doing, which was all pretty much underground street, art, right? Like it was different types of art, but it was still mainly coming from the same source, which was the streets. So in 2002 is when I opened up Cruz Gallery, and I opened up in Alhambra. And really the reason I opened up the gallery was because I got tired of using Krylon spray paint. And I had been to Europe a number of times and saw the awesome paint they had over there, namely Belton Molotow, which became one of my favorite cans to use, because we only had like 30 or 40 colors to choose from. And I'd go to Germany and they had like thousands of colors, from all these different brands. And it was incredible that you had all this palette to work with. So I contacted Molotow in Germany and I said, hey, when do you get spray paint in the United States? Because I'm tired of like Krylon. And they said, actually, do you want it for yourself or do you want to sell it? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I decided, you know what, I want to sell it. They told me what it'd take to become a dealer of the paint and how much money I needed to get, so I can buy my first shipment of paint. And before you knew it, I opened up a space in May of 2002 in Alhambra, and we were the first distributors on the West Coast of Belton Molotow paint. And so that's why we started the gallery, was because it was a shop. And then, like I said, we had a shop, so might as well adorn the walls with artwork and try to push artwork from some of my friends. And we did that, and we did it very successfully. I gave first solo shows to people like Vile, Patrick Martinez. We were selling, like Crayola pieces for like $300 back then, So anyways, all these really cool artists came out from there. And then we moved downtown in 2006 because we just needed a bigger space. And once I moved to downtown, everything changed. Like we started selling more art than spray cans, and which was a good thing. And we started getting a lot more buzz about the art form and about what we were doing and promoting. And, it just took off, and I did it for 10 years. And the whole point of it was to make street art and graffiti and stuff like that a viable art form. And it finally was. So after like 10 years of doing it, I kind of was burned out, and I was like, okay, I'm done. So I closed the gallery in 2012. But it was a great journey. And I met so many people, and we did so many things that, I'm really proud of. And yeah, it was a great time,
Awesome. Isabel, I'm going to shift now to Isabel and give a little intro for our guest. Isabel Rojas-Williams, I've known her work for a very, very long time. She's an art historian and curator, and she served as the Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles's executive director from 2011 to 2016. An awesome project that just inspired me for so many years when I moved to Los Angeles. She's a native of Chile and resident of Los Angeles since 1973. She has served on several mayoral committees to be a liaison with the Latino, Asian, and African American heritage committees. In addition to that, she earned a graduate degree at Cal State Los Angeles and then joined the faculty there in 2007. She researched in her thesis the work of David Afero Siqueiros, and Siqueiros, a muralist in exile. It was remarkable, and I'd like to hear a little bit more, Isabel, about your connection with the Siqueiros mural here in LA. Isabel had a major role in helping with the mural ordinance signed by Mayor Garcetti in 2013 that lifted the 2002 mural moratorium in Los Angeles, a very important political connection with the street art market. Isabel also was a very important contributor to the Pacific Standard Time, the Getty Project, LA, Latin American and Latino art in LA, along with the other Pacific Standard Time projects that the Getty has put forward. Without further ado, let's welcome Isabel Rojas-Williams.
Thank you so much for making me part of this important conversation. And, I would like to begin telling you how did I get into this, because, I arrived here in 1973, as you said, and I came here from Chile, escaping the cruel dictatorship, Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship. And so I arrived here at the times when in Los Angeles, the Chicanos and the African-American people were fighting for civil rights. And so to me, I was escaping from a country where murals were painted all over the city, the country, with the very same issues that the Black empowerment movement and the Chicano mural movement were painting on walls in Los Angeles. They were, human rights, education, issues of identity, police brutality, all those issues that nobody spoke about on TV or on the newspapers. These are issues that I could only read on the walls of the city. So it was at this time when I met a lot of our iconic muralists that gave birth to the Chicano mural movement in Strata Courts, Bow Heights, and throughout LA, in San Fernando Valley. So I met them at the time. I saw what was happening about what they were writing on the walls. And many of these people were activists, just like me. I was a college student fighting for our rights. And many of the artists at the Strata Courts, for example, they just painted what they didn't have or they wanted to have, or the people in the community. At this time as well, I was going to school, and as any immigrant in this country, I was trying to make a living. And time went by, and when my son was of age, not driving age, but of age, his art career began in East Los Angeles, writing on the walls of the alleys in East Los Angeles. And that's when, through him, I learned to love the city, and it's how unique and how vibrant the city of Los Angeles was. And then I was through these times when I got to meet many of his friends, and that included ManOne. We happened to live in the same neighborhood. I did go to the gallery in Alhambra. I didn't get to meet him, but I saw what he was talking about earlier. And my son was too young to drive himself in Los Angeles. So I would take him, to different places, and we won't say his name so he won't be embarrassed, but I would take him to paint pieces where he has his idols. And, ManOne and my son have a few years of difference, not many, but in those days, it was a big difference for them. And so I was driving all over LA, and going back to when I arrived here, I was 23 years old. And at the time, the people were coming back from Vietnam War. And I couldn't avoid, to see many of, the artworks that were created in the Chicano and the African-American movement, mural movement, people that look like me. I was very alone. I didn't know anybody, I was just, I didn't have any family here, just came here by myself. So seeing people on those walls that looked like me, that had struggled with the same issues that I struggle with in Chile, the reason why, I saw 3,000 people die in Chile during the dictatorship, 200,000 of us are exiled throughout the world. And I saw the same issues on those walls. So to me, it was a way to embrace what was happening with the mural art movement. And then later, through my son, meeting so many of his friends, and Alex, or ManOne, was a person that it was very impactful in my life, because when I saw his gallery in Alhambra and seeing a young man doing what he was doing, it was impressive. And throughout the times later, we connected. I decided to go for my master's degrees at Cal State LA, to keep an open connection with my son, because the 90s were here, graffiti was arriving in LA, and I didn't understand, what is this? And so one of the things I did, it was to interview Alex in his second gallery at Crew West in downtown Winston. So Alex is part of my master's thesis. That includes from the 3 grades all the way to graffiti art in Los Angeles. So before that, before meeting Alex, I met his father. And probably Alex doesn't want me to talk about this, but he was a young man and my son was a little kid. And then we were talking. I met his father. He used to work in the store that I used to visit. And he would talk to me about his son, that he's doing this art, these weird things that I don't know what it is. And then I would tell him, my son too, I don't know what. So we were, sharing with each other what was happening. And one day I went to Self-Help Graphics and I saw Alex's father there. And I said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, my son, ManOne, is here, or he was one of the, I don't remember, this was in, you said 2000, but I met you before that in the 90s. So I saw Alex for the first time, and then, we became good friends, and I wrote about him in my thesis. He included my son in his gallery. Actually, my son's artwork saw in his gallery, and then I included him and many other people as part of my curatorial in Los Angeles. And as I say, I wrote about him in my thesis, and I compared his fragmentation of the forms in his art with the futurists in Italy. And so to me, it took me, like I think about today, what's happening in those days and now with graffiti art, and how related it is, the colors and the fragmentation of the art to futurism and to cubism. So I never had a negative feeling about graffiti art. I just didn't understand it. But through my son, I was able to connect with these artists, talk to them, and see what they were doing. And so I learned to love. Not only I fell in love with Los Angeles, and I fell in love with, I already was in love with the murals, but then with graffiti art and working together with many of them. And it is incredible to me that from those days, like ManOne mentioned earlier, that we were fighting for the right of the artist to write on walls, where in cases I had to go to court to defend some graffiti artists because they didn't want to share with their parents what was happening. But in those days, if you were caught, in many cases, you could have gone to jail, and as the parents, we would have to pay a high fine from the city because our children were painting graffiti on walls. So moving forward, in 2002, well, in the 90s, we had graffiti arriving in Los Angeles and technology. So graffiti artists, in 1 second, they became celebrities throughout the world because their pieces, as well as them themselves, became world known. During this time too, I remember my son and Alex went to Ireland to paint a mural in, where was it, Alex, the city that you guys painted that mural?
In Londonderry in northern.
In Northern Ireland, yes. So all these things are happening, and technology is making all these artists world known. Artists are sharing and visiting with each other throughout the world, something that their counterparts, the muralists from the late 60s, 70s, and through the 90s, didn't have that opportunity. They did not have the opportunity to become instant celebrities as the younger generations had or have. So that was a big, incredible change in public art in our city. Then, in 2002, all these artists, graffiti artists, as well as the pioneer muralists in Los Angeles, had to, there was a mural moratorium established by the city because the advertisement companies sued the city for sharing the same walls as the muralists were having. So the city decided to declare a mural moratorium that lasted from 2002 to 2013. And that was the time when I got real involved with the politics of City Hall, defending the rights of the artists to have freedom of expression. I couldn't believe that I had come from a country with oppressive dictator to a country where I thought freedom was the #1 issue here, that the artists could not paint because it was illegal to paint in Los Angeles. During those 10 years, many of the artists couldn't do things because it was a real time when they could have gone to jail. So many of our murals were whitewashed by the city because they were tagged. And I want to make a difference here between tagging and graffiti art. To me, it's very important that, tagging is completely different than graffiti. And maybe Alex wants to elaborate a little more on that. But so the city decides that there are no murals to be painted. And 10 years go by. In 2013, we worked mostly with Mayor Villaraigosa. And then in 2013, 3 months after Mayor Garcetti's mandate, he signed the mural ordinance that returned the freedom of expression to artists. So things changed.
Isabel, during that transition, you were already working at the concept of the Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Yes, I began.
The moratorium was still in place, and you shifted your energies into the Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles.
But I was working simultaneously on all this. I began my history with murals and graffiti art goes back to 30 years with the murals and to graffiti art from the 90s. In 2010, I began working with the Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles to help document, research, preserve the murals of Los Angeles. So it was a time when it's at the peak of the mural moratorium. So to me, I spent a lot of time at City Hall, supported by hundreds of artists. I mean, they all came with me. I was just trying to voice the voice of the voiceless, and meeting with the politicians every day, with the 15 council members to ask them for help to approve the mural ordinance that would give back the freedom of expression to artists. And in reality, because the age I am, I grew up with the muralists when they would go out and find a wall and paint on a wall. I wasn't too crazy about the mural ordinance that would have more control over the art, but we didn't have a choice. It was one of those things where the mural ordinance would allow for the muralists to paint the wall again, because there was no other way to do it.
Mhm.
So the mural ordinance was established. I was working with the Mural Conservancy, talking to the politicians, trying to raise funds to preserve murals, trying to work with the artists and curatorial, so to involve them in everything that we were doing with the culture and the arts in Los Angeles.
Awesome. Let me come back and bring ManOne back into the conversation. What were the themes that dominated your work personally as you began to move toward large murals in the community? And also, Isabel, you can reflect also on the dominant themes of murals in Los Angeles. They're very varied, but I'm wondering, ManOne, what direction did you find your work going in?
Well, coming from a graffiti background, it's always, graffiti starts with your name, with words, with letters. So that's what I started with. I was doing my name as big as I could in different styles, and I really loved the wild style techniques and stuff like that. And that's where I started. Then I started adding characters and things like that to my letters, just to enhance them more. And it was pretty much a traditional kind of graffiti evolution. But then it came to a point where I started realizing that whatever I was putting up on the wall, people were seeing it, like, not just me, but any graffiti writer at the time. So messages became very important. So like, you put something on the wall. I remember some kid came up to me one time and he recited some little 2-sentence poem that I had wrote on the side of a piece. And that's when I realized, like, I better be saying good things on these walls, because kids are watching, other artists are paying attention. And so now I started to really focus on, like, hey, what do I want to say? What do I want to do? I graduated from college in 1993 and have been making a living as a full-time artist ever since. And one of the things that allowed me to do that is to jump into different arenas. So I would do murals on the streets for Coca-Cola and for MTV. I would do backdrops and videos, and I would do ad campaigns for Nike, and I would do solo shows and sell at galleries. And so I was trying to just do whatever I could to make a living. It wasn't easy, and I was just hustling. So public art was obviously one thing I did, but it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of funding for public art. Like, if I could just choose one thing to do full time, it would be just paint murals. That's all I ever wanted to do. But there's just not always that the funding available to just be consistently doing murals. So you have to figure out other ways to make money. But I started applying for public art projects. And one of the very first big public art projects I got was I did the first in Soto gold line extension for the MTA. And that was in the like 2006 or something. That was my first like major public art award. And I was like, oh my God, I never had someone give me so much money for one mural, and what am I gonna do and all that stuff. What I had started doing previously before that was I decided to start painting portraits of people in the community. And the very first mural I did was a portrait of my niece. It was in Highland Park. And I started painting them in this very colorful kind of pattern like that I still do to this day. And it was so well received that I decided, like, that's gonna be part of my arsenal, right? Like, I do my characters and I do my graffiti letters, but then I'm also gonna do these portrait things. And I was able to mix that love of graffiti and portraiture with, for example, in that MTA commission, I did these like letters that on one side, the letters were almost 200 feet long. And then I did a portrait, I did 4 portraits, one of Cesar Chavez, Sister Karen from Self-Help Graphics, my grandfather on another wall. And then, so that was the first time I kind of fused my graffiti with my portraiture for public art. And that led me to the road that I'm on now, where I want to highlight people in the community and showcase them to the world. You know, one of the things about living in LA is that everybody who comes to LA, they always want to meet celebrities. They're always like, oh, where's, you know, I want to go meet this movie star or this rock star or whatever. And I always tell people there's millions of people in this city and not all of them are celebrities, but a lot of them are very well known in the community and should be highlighted and treated as celebrities. So that's a lot of what I do with my murals. I started my own self-funded campaign years ago called Faces LA. And I've been painting portraits of people and artists all over the city. And, you know, to me, that was like the most authentic way I could reach and give back out to the community. You know, I do a lot of workshops with kids and murals with kids and things like that. And I love doing that. But, you know, for me to be able to speak to a broader audience and really share my love for Los Angeles and stuff like that, that's how I've chosen to do it. And it's been, you know, it's been going pretty well. And, you know, I love highlighting, you know, my friends and people that I respect and people from LA. You know, I think it's a way to honor the city and the people that I love, you know.
I've noticed in what I call your tributes, maybe that's not the appropriate word, but I have noticed your work around the city, and I've always felt this is a person I should know, or maybe this is a person I know because it's like somebody in my own family. And your recent portrait of Nani, who passed away unfortunately this year, and I'll circle back to Isabel to talk about her work in the community. It was such a remarkable piece, and you shifted from what you had intended to do to put that portrait up in the US Bank building with a group of other artists working on murals. Talk a little bit about how you shifted from where you were and the need to give voice to Nani, who was such an important part of our community.
Yeah, so this project you're talking about happened in March of this year, and they selected 15 artists to paint murals up on top of the 72nd floor of the US Bank Tower, which is owned by Silver Cities, who also owns the World Trade Center and stuff like that. So they've been doing this in New York, where they bring street artists up to different floors to do art. And so they were doing it now in LA for the first time. And, you know, I was lucky enough to be asked to do it and submit it. And they loved my concept or whatever, which was a totally different concept. And a week before going up to do those murals, our friend Noni Olabisi passed away unexpectedly. And which, by the way, I met through Isabel, you know, like that's a direct link. I would have never met her if it wasn't for Isabel. And, you know, her and Isabel were great friends. So anyway, so right away, I was like, I can't be up here doing this mural while, you know, this really great artist from LA just passed away. And I just thought it'd be a great way to honor her legacy by being able to do a mural up that high and kind of overlooking the city. And so I quickly told the producers of the event, like, if I could, you know, do that instead. And they were totally like on board. They loved the concept, and they respected that I was honoring a specific person, you know. And so yes, I did the mural. And, you know, what was amazing is the days that I was up there painting it, you know, they were having her services down in the city. Mm-hmm. And so her family wasn't able to come see the mural when I finished. But I invited them maybe like 3 or 4 weeks later. Got an opportunity to go back up and show the mural to some people. And I invited her family, her son, her nieces, her sister, Isabel. You also went there and saw it. And what was amazing was the reaction that I got, which is always fascinates me when I do especially a public piece. And, you know, as an artist, you have a concept of what you're doing and why you're doing it and whatever, but to see people's reaction to it, and it's sometimes it's very unexpected, but to me, it's the most gratifying when there's the public sees something in what you created that maybe you didn't see, or just they see it on a whole different, deeper level. And I mean, it was just like amazing to have the family see the mural and just really, you know, the son just couldn't stop crying and was like, you know, he's like, I never knew my mom had affected so many people in the city. Like, she's just my mom. And here I am, you know, here I am looking at her and realizing like what she meant to this whole community. And I was like, yeah, that's true, you know. So that was pretty awesome to do.
That brings me back to Isabel's work with the Mural Conservancy, because one of the things I noticed early on, Isabel, in your work was what I call truth to power on the wall. And you embraced choices to put in the Mural Conservancy projects, either for preservation or for documentation. Tell us a little bit about how you established criteria and got involved with such a wide range. But coming back to Nani's work, her unflinching voice in the community on the wall. And yet you took time to pull work of that sort into what you were doing with the Mural Conservancy.
Well, honestly, it wasn't easy to make decisions. I also wasn't alone making the decisions. I would suggest, and I have a board, but it was pretty much I would bring my ideas to the board and present them. And, you know, like by working on bringing the photos, taking the photos of the murals of Los Angeles through the Mural Conservancy's website, I also learned to, in my mind, select what was important. Everything was important to me, but I had to, because raising funds to make this, it wasn't easy. I had to work 24/7 in order to make things happen. But, you know, I look into the historic importance of the artworks, the stature of the artist, the year that the mural was painted. And, you know, I began, as you probably all know, from the late 60s to the 90s, when graffiti appeared in Los Angeles, the issues conveyed on murals were related to social justice, human rights, education, freedom of speech, police brutality. All those issues, identity, were part of the murals, showing icons like ManOne mentioned earlier, such as, you know, Cesar Chavez, and people who were important in our community. But since we passed the mural ordinance in 2013, there was a mural renaissance. Things did change. And I saw that change of what is on the murals now. And I see a little shift. You know, I see that there are more decorative murals, there are more abstract murals. And so to me, also the murals were painted and done in different styles. And at the time I was at the Mural Conservancy, I suggested, for example, to restore murals at the Estrada Courts for obvious reasons, as a place of the birth of the mural, the Chicano mural movement, and like the freeway murals that were painted in 1984. Now we have 2028. I'm hoping that the younger generations get the opportunity to paint murals on the freeways. Which has to do a little bit with the vision that I would like to have for LA, giving the opportunity to our younger people to paint murals. But so going back to Noni, but first, before I talk about Noni, I also suggested at the time I applied for a grant with council member price to restore a mural. And we restored the first graffiti mural in Los Angeles. And that mural was of ManOne at the library on Vermont in South Los Angeles. And I didn't pick it because I knew ManOne or because he was my friend. I picked it because, to me, he was doing exactly what his counterparts were doing in the early days. He painted people from the community, people who were important, people, and perhaps Alex can elaborate a little more on that mural, the one that is called They Claim I Am a Criminal. It really touched me. It was important to me that that mural was restored. So I'm gonna go back to Noni. Noni was a wonderful friend of mine. We met in our struggle for social justice. I learned a lot. I worked very closely with African-American artists, and I have written about the Black Panthers for the Black Panthers exhibitions in Oakland. They happened here too, in LA and in Chicago. So Sepia Collective, wonderful friends of mine, they invited me to write for the catalog for the Black Panthers exhibition in Oakland. Noni taught me, we sat down many times about Black Panthers for self-defense. And I never said for self-defense because I didn't know why. He explained all this to me. So we, in our social issues struggle, we discovered that we were sisters of the same issues. We learned to love each other. You know, it was like she was right there with me for the mural ordinance struggle. I invited her to talk with me at Hauser and Wirth about her mural in downtown LA. I invited her to talk with me at Occidental College. We both opened doors for each other because we spoke the same language. Perhaps our colors were different, but our hearts and minds and beliefs were the same. So in 1992, Noni painted this incredible mural, To Serve and Protect, which is one of my favorite murals. People always ask me, which is your favorite murals? You know, like I was one of the academic advisors for the restoration of the Siqueiros mural at Plaza Olvera, painted in 1932. And I love it. And I see the history there, and it's still today so current, so today, every issue there is happening today. But this mural that Noni painted of the history of the Black Panthers, it made me cry. I stood in front of the murals and I still could cry about when I think about, and I'm gonna read a little bit of what she told me, what is been written about that mural, To Serve and Protect. And she told me, and this is written all over about this mural, it commemorates the Black Panther Party for self-defense and its unforgettable contribution to African-American history. The mural is dedicated to all political prisoners, as well as those who lost their lives fighting for truth, justice, and freedom. And that's exactly what Noni and I were always talking about, that we stood for those principles. So when I saw the mural that ManOne did, I saw what the figures that he painted in his graffiti style. And to me, it was the same as the very figurative figures that the pioneer muralists did, that ManOne depicted those community heroes, the unsung heroes of our city. And perhaps Alec can talk a little bit about, you know, Mother Rock and you know, all the people who are in there. So I'm very humbled that I had the opportunity to help that mural to be restored at the library. So I'll pass that to you, Alex, about the people on the mural.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm interested in both how the community becomes a subject in the artwork, and also if you could talk to how the community is served by the images they see?
Yeah, so that specific mural was really interesting because a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, I have friends who run this library on Vermont, and it's called the Southern California. I'm blanking on the name, but it's a the SoCal Library on Vermont." And when I went over there to talk to them and find out about, because I didn't know anything about that library, I found out that it was really important for the community because for everybody in LA, because that's where they were housing all these works from the Black Panthers, from Kappa, from Mother's Rock, from Cesar Chavez, from the UFW. A lot of libraries don't have access to some of these original documents, posters, drawings, even from some of the protests, from the Watts riots, things like that. They were housed there, and it was like amazing that they had these resources that I had never seen in other libraries. And then to find out that it was one of the few buildings that wasn't, I think it was actually the only building that wasn't burnt down during the riots, the LA riots in '92, was another thing that was pretty amazing. And so anyway, so I decided to do a mural that, like Isabel said, it was called "They Claim I'm a Criminal." Mm-hmm. And those are lyrics from Public Enemy song. Because to me, it was always like, as a brown person in LA, we're always viewed as criminals. And I can attest to that, having guns pulled on me by LAPD because I'm painting a mural, by sheriffs putting guns on me and trying to handcuff me because I'm doing a backdrop for a VH1 video. They just right away assume that you're a criminal because you're holding a spray can or because you're brown and you're not supposed to be doing stuff like this. And so that was the idea of the mural. And I decided to depict a giant portrait of Michael Zinzan, who unfortunately isn't here with us anymore, but I got to meet him in the early 90s when he was doing some of his events for CAPA, which is the Coalition Against Police Abuse. And that was through Stosh and ICU Art that we were able to collaborate and do murals for some of these protests and some of these events that he was holding back in the day. So he was actually someone that I actually knew on some level. And so I decided to put his portrait really large and in the community. Was interesting, as public art always is interesting. When you're creating it, you never know what's going to happen. I was up on top of my dad was with me, and we were filling in the big area on top of the portrait of Michael Zinzan. And he always wore this hairnet, really big hairnet, because he had these really big dreadlocks. And I wasn't there yet. I was just at the forehead. So I hadn't drawn in the hair yet, or the hairnet. And these guys drove by and they started throwing bottles at me because they thought I was painting Biggie Smalls. And so they were yelling all this profanity at me and throwing bottles because they thought I was, promoting Biggie Smalls, who had just passed away. And, and we're right in LA neighborhood. So I had to paint really fast and get the hairpiece on there and all that to show like, this is not Biggie Smalls, So that was interesting. But then another thing was when I was painting the shirt, which was basically like blue and purples, just a shirt that he had on, I was going to put little drawings of people protesting from, different organizations and different like UFW and Mother's Rock and things like that. And as I started painting that, this little kid came, and the little kid was standing there watching me for, I don't know, probably a good 45 minutes and, just talking or whatever. And then I told him, you know what, you want me to put you in the mural? And he said, yeah. And his eyes lit up. And so I just started drawing him, just like he was standing there, and I was just drawing like a little sketch of him on the shirt. And he was so happy, and he laughed. He just ran away. And I was like, okay. So I don't know, about an hour later, like 15 kids show up. And they're all like, we want to be on the mural. We want to be on the mural. And I was like, oh my God. And so
he started a movement.
Yeah, it was
in
like
the neighborhood.
Yeah. And so that, I mean, if you ask how people become involved in the mural, that's one way. And you know, the hard part for me was that I couldn't fit all 15 kids in there, so I added maybe like another 5 or 6 kids. But then I let some of the kids help me paint some of the areas and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, they really felt ownership on that mural. And these were young kids. I mean, I'm talking about like 9, 10, 11 years old. And so, you know, they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives, you know? And, you know, so it's really interesting what happens with murals like that and their life and their lifespan and how things change and whatever. And it got to a point where, you know, one kid at some point tagged the wall, and it wasn't cleaned up quickly enough. So another kid tagged it, and so on and so on. And eventually it needed to get repaired. And that's what Isabel was talking about, that we got the councilman there to actually help us, you know, with some funding to restore the mural. And the mural's still there. It probably has a few tags, but over, you know, it's just a very interesting lifespan that each of these murals creates within the community. And just, you know, there's a dialogue, right? There's a dialogue that you put it out as an artist, but then the community embraces it, and it becomes theirs. It's really the community's mural at the end of the day. So that's what I love about doing murals, is that it's community. It's also me, and it's also everyone else. It's just like this weird way. It's hard to explain. Only muralists can really understand the dialogue that happens, but it's a really great feeling when things work out, you know?
Well, you mentioned earlier about, I'm not sure that you use these words, but developing the language of your art. And when we see a mural that is in open space, and to our audience, what we've been talking about today is open space work, where you can walk by, see it, engage with it, and so forth.
Yeah.
But that language, particularly in the mural that you're talking about, and also in Nani's work, speaks to the community in a voice that is true.
Yeah.
And that power, that empowerment, I should say, for the community is writ large on this big wall.
Yeah. You know, one thing I didn't mention about that mural, that it was kind of interesting. You know, sometimes when you approach a wall as an artist, you see it a certain way, and then there's things about it that make it difficult or challenging, and you have to figure out a way to work it out in your mural, you know, and how do you make it part of the mural. And one of the things was that there was these 2 giant telephone poles right in the middle of the mural, like, you know, from the sidewalk. So whenever you took a photograph from across the street, there was these 2 giant poles, telephone poles, and then there was a light post. So there was these 3 bars, right? So what I decided to do is I painted in between those poles, I painted bars up all from top of the building to the bottom. And so Michael Zinzan's portrait is off to the left of the mural, and the bars are on the right. And I have these little creatures that I call graffiti spirits, and these ones were dressed like riot police, and so they're holding the keys to the freedom of these 2 hands, with one with handcuffs and the other one with you know, like the stuff they used in slavery, like the chains and stuff like that. Yeah. And so they're breaking the, you know, getting freedom by breaking the chains. And the thing that I found interesting was, as I was painting this mural, I realized that depending on what time of the day you saw the mural, Michael Zinzan was either behind the bars or out or free, because the sun would move and the bars would move with it on the mural. So there was at one point during the day, the entire wall had these lines, and it looked like he was in jail. And then at other parts, like early in the morning, there were no bars in front of him, so he looked like he was free. And that was kind of like, you know, it kind of happened. You know, I didn't have that planned, but I saw it as how can I, you know, talk to the community and at the same time do something visually kind of cool and important and different. And it worked out. So yeah, I mean, on every mural, I think we have challenges, and not just with the community and how we deal with the community and community members and all that stuff, which is very important. But sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's like there's a window, and like how do you deal with this window right in the middle of your mural, you know? So those are things that we always have to think about when we're in like you said, the open landscape, you know.
And in Isabel, in your work, there are a couple of ways in which, many ways in which you have been instrumental in the preservation of work. One is to document. Edwin, could you pull up the Mural Conservancy site?
Sure,
Just-
no problem. Also, just to let you know, there are some chat questions and there's a raise.
Okay.
And before I go into that, I just, you asked me earlier about the themes and what is conveyed in the murals of today.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to bring it to today because there is a young woman that I totally admire that is making very important murals in LA. Her name is Corey Matty, or also known as LA Hope Dealer. And her murals are, she has been able to raise an incredible amount of money for Black Lives Matters, for the last one that she did is called For the Love of Ukraine, and the one that she's an incredible trailblazer of different issues related to women, and she has raised money for people who, for homelessness and people with food insecurities. So, you know, there are also artists like her are bringing a lot of the old issues with a new style of painting. I
Yeah.
just wanted to bring her name to
Very
that.
good.
Yes.
So Edwin, click on the bottom link that says murals. I just want people to know this incredible documentation. So Isabel was involved with the physical preservation of the work in the community on the walls, but also the documentation, because if a building comes down, down comes the mural. And we have this database now available for everyone to use when you're doing research. And I used to come home from my walks through the city and pore over this weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend, looking at this database to find out more about the artists who were doing work in the community. Thank you, Edwin. So now back to you, Isabel. The unique value of street art in the community. What you touched on it just now with your example, giving voice to the issues of today. What else would you add to that?
Well, you know, to me, murals are incredibly important in our community. I wish I could say that people read a lot of books, but the reality is that they don't. We don't as much as we used to. Technology has affected that, and the younger generation are so used to instant gratification. They are not, you know, so the murals to me serve that purpose. They see what these artists are doing, and they immediately can see the education, the empowerment, you know, the issues that affect our society. They see their faces on those walls, and you know, murals bring a lot of education and vibrancy to our city. Los Angeles used to be known as the mural capital of the world in the 80s, something that, you know, in between the 80s and the 90s, we lost to Philadelphia because our murals were whitewashed and the muralists could not go out and paint as much as they used to. So to me, it's part of our history, it's part of our education. They're also, to me, the bridge between the streets and the art institutions. And I have experienced this in many occasions where I talk in front of a mural and the young people ask me, and who is that person and what does it mean? And who was the artist? And then I tell them, and then the next thing I know is that the parents call me and they tell me, Isabel, my son or my daughter asked me to take them to a museum or to a gallery to experience firsthand the style of painting of that specific muralist. So to me, in this city, even though we are not the mural capital of the world any longer, we had set a standard of what muralism is all about that go back to the 1930s when we had the first murals painted here. And our artists keep on doing it. They keep on painting murals. The styles have changed. Muralists now are many of them painting on polytab, which allows for the murals to be moved. So there's so many new things. The techniques are changing, the styles are changing, but the history of muralism in our cities remains the same. Empowerment, education, open air museums, tourism. So many people come to LA just to see the murals. It's incredible. I have given murals to people from different countries. They just love our murals. So to me, the preservation is not only related to documenting and preserving the murals physically, but having that opportunity to show who we are in any style of painting, in any neighborhood throughout our city, of who we are. And, because it takes me to the theme of how every neighborhood is different. What you see in Los Angeles, you don't see in San Pedro. What you see in Santa Monica or Venice, you do not see in South LA. They're very specific by neighborhood. Even the colors are specific, I see in the Latino community and the African American community, they're very bold, brilliant, gorgeous colors. While when you're closer to the ocean, they're more like marine themes, more airy and, peaceful. And so, it's incredible how murals affect our mood and how they educate us. So to me, in one word, is empowerment. That's what they do. And that's what the murals are in our city.
Thank you. ManOne, let me shift back to you. The vision and aspiration you have for open space work going forward.
Well, in the context of what's happening in the world now, it's very interesting because, we touched on it a little bit. Isabel did, at least. But, this whole thing about the youth and how they experience life nowadays. And if you're talking about the future, then you have to be talking about the kids, and you have to be talking about the next generations. And they're experiencing everything through screens, right? Through their phones and through the internet or whatever. And so some of the evolution that has to happen for murals to stay, still have some viability, I think in the future, is just to have to integrate these things and understand these things. Not, we can't be old dinosaurs and be like, oh no, I'm not going to be in that world because this is the way I do it and that's it, because then it'll die, So we have to figure out a way to bring up the next generation and allow them to express themselves and take it technologically into a new direction, right? And we've seen that already there's augmented reality and animation, and obviously we've seen the whole thing with NFTs and all that stuff happening. So there's definitely this really interesting thing happening with how do I, as an artist, especially as a muralist, not only paint walls, but how do those walls transcend generations, right? How can I speak to the younger kids? How could my work still remain relevant to what's coming up ahead, right? And so one of the things obviously is still producing strong work and still painting murals. I think you can't, well, for me, to speak for myself, painting a mural is the ultimate thing for me. I don't care how many paintings I do in the studio or on my iPad or whatever. Painting a mural to me is the most exhilarating thing I can do. So I don't want to stop doing that, but I'm trying to think of ways to be able to pass that on, right? And so one of the things that I battle with all the time in my business, especially, is a lot of these owners of buildings, like they want your mural to just be like Instagrammable, right? Like they want people to come to their building to take a photo in front of your mural. And I tell the people, the building owners, like, I want the same thing. We want the same thing. I want people to come and stand in front of my mural and take a picture, and that'd be great. I'd love that too. But the problem is that a lot of these building owners think like, oh, well, then it needs to be, you know, there has to be wings on it, and there has to be like this cookie cutter like mural because that's what you see on Instagram. And that's where we as muralists have to kind of like educate, you know, these building owners and sometimes even city officials, and be like, no, like the people will be drawn to strong work. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, this cookie cutter, you know, cartoon image that you're seeing right now, because that's just a trend. The longer viability for your building is that it's done authentically by an artist. And I get asked all the time by developers and building owners to do murals that there's no way I'm ever going to do them. I mean, like I have a person that I really respect, I consider a friend, and he wants me to do a mural that he saw in Spain on his honeymoon on his building in Highland Park. And I'm like, dude, that mural has nothing to do with anybody in Highland Park or in LA for that matter.
You know, this is kind of like one of the questions in the chat,
yeah,
which is, I mean, I don't think this is what the person's really asking, but it's an interesting question. Oh, and before I ask it, I just want to say hi to Robert Vargas, who is another esteemed local muralist who dropped in. You probably know his work if you've driven around downtown. So thank you,
Robert,
for coming. And I think, yeah, Robert knows Dylan.
Yeah.
Hola, everyone.
Hey.
Hey.
Right on.
Memory lane talking about Crew West and all of that, Alex.
Yeah. I mean, when I moved my gallery to downtown, Robert was already there. He was like, he still is probably the king of downtown murals and stuff. And I remember I first met him, and the first thing, a friend connected us. And then I went out, I think, and saw him paint on the street. And I was like, oh man, this guy's crazy. This guy's on another level. And then after that, we just became friends, and he would come to the gallery. He had an open door at the gallery, and he would come in during art walks or whenever and do these amazing portraits that you probably all seen. And yeah, that just happened to be that I moved in a neighborhood where he was at, and you know, kind of how like we meet each other as artists, you know.
Absolutely.
And Robert, I walked over to see.
I know. I'm sorry I missed you. I saw the photo. Thank you. I saw the photo.
To see your piece, but
yes.
And when you were talking earlier, and Isabel also brought this into the conversation about the community in your work, and the design of your wall in Pershing Square is not a design I would find on a package or some other place that you put artwork. It is specific about Pershing Square and your vision. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when it comes to
It looks like we.
Oh no, did he drop out?
He dropped out.
No, he's still there. He's just muted.
Yeah,
Oh.
his camera and mute went off.
Oh no. Well, before he gets back, I'm going to skip to the audience questions, and when he gets back, he can answer that. One of the questions from the audience was from Fernando about, oh, and thank you for saying nice things in the chat, Fernando. Some nonprofit organizations that artists can work with, and so I'm glad Eileen and Isabel discussed the Mural Conservancy, and I know there's more like that. Actually, I'll just ask all the questions, and we'll see if we can work them all in. The one that reminded me of the chat was something that ManOne was saying about at what point does the mural belong to the community and not so much to the artist anymore. This is very different from a guy trying to get you to paint a mural that he saw somewhere else.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, this idea that like it's kind of that thing where the kids all wanted to be in your mural. Like, at what point is it kind of a thing that belongs to the community and not to you anymore? I guess legally it always belongs to you, but what do you guys think of that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, different muralists approach painting murals in different ways. And there are a lot of muralists, and I won't mention any names, but there's a lot of very well-known muralists out there who just do their studio work and the stuff that they came up with on their computers, and they just do it huge on the side of a building. And to me, that's not a community mural. To me, that has nothing to do with the community. A lot of these artists get very well known for their style, and they end up getting commissioned in different cities all over the world because of how good they are technically. But that has nothing to do with the community, you know. But then other artists like myself, when we approach a community, like we from the get-go, it's like I'm not gonna go do a mural in an area where I don't even live and just have the audacity of just paint whatever the hell's in my mind, you know, and not consult anybody. Oh, I think Robert's back. So to me, it's always like,
Sorry, guys.
you're back. The approach is always to me like, I am part of the community and I have to listen to the community. And even while I'm painting it belongs to the community. And like, how do we work together? You know, not physically, but just, you know, how do we work together thinking about this for something that can belong in this space, you know? And that's to me, that's just about the approach. So yeah.
Eileen, back to the question.
Oh yeah.
I actually got to hear it before the battery ran out.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
But the answer to that, and touching on what ManOne was speaking about earlier, and I think Isabel was kind of commenting as well, is site-specific murals. You know, for me, I feel that there's a responsibility for artists when they are creating work in different parts of the world, different parts of the city, to be able to reflect some of those communities and what's happening there. Sometimes just being able to highlight what's already happening there. So, you know, we have to think about the people that live with the art when we leave those areas. And usually, just like ManOne, it's usually I usually paint somebody that's a part of the community, a part of someone of standing or someone that should be seen. And for example, that mural in Pershing Square has a lot of those unifying themes that are constant kind of pillars of my work.
And we have one other question. Is it possible for Elizabeth? Are you still out there? Did you? I don't know if I can unmute Elizabeth, but if she's still out there and she has a question, you could put it in the chat. And if not, I will. Let's see. Isabel, what do you think of some of this stuff that we're talking about?
I'm sorry?
Oh, what do you think about these topics about whether a mural belongs to the community or the artist?
Well, it will always belong to the artist because of copyrights. But in the minute that you paint it in the community, you know, the community has ownership because it's about them. But the copyrights is a different story. So, you know, we are talking about two different things. But I wanted to address something that ManOne said a little bit earlier regarding to how everything is changing. I know we don't have much time, but I wanted to mention it because technology is changing everything. And I know many of the younger artists have to move that direction or they want to. So during the pandemic, Apple contacted or chose 15 different artists in Los Angeles to depict digital likeness of unsung heroes of the community of Los Angeles. So they chose like essential workers, they chose doctors and nurses, neighbors who worked during the dark times of the pandemic. They were checking on their neighbors, bringing food, the parents that had to stay at home with the kids, the difficulties, all these 15 people, that 15 portraits that were created at the top of the newly restored Apple Tower building on 8th and Broadway in downtown LA. And I just wanted to say thank you publicly to Leah Smithson for choosing me to make a likeness of my face on that building. Because, I don't want to put a feather on my cap here, but I think that the fact that somebody who didn't know me, never met me before, chose me and my work, it really, I'm very humbled by that. So it goes to what you were talking about, Alex, how things are changing. The portraits, I don't know if any of you have seen them, about the tower building in downtown LA, are digital likeness of people of our community. So it seems like many artists are going in that direction, all these immersive art exhibitions that we're attending. So I think we can do parallel things. I think we can do both things. I don't think that we can, forget or eliminate what people like Robert Vargas is doing. His portraits of community people are fantastic. He's so good at it. Or what you do, Alex, I think we can do both. And that takes me to what's happening. And I'm sure you both have something to say about this, about what's happening with the influencers and how people like Kim Kardashian taking photos in front of your murals, and they're choosing mostly graffiti art to take photos to promote their brands. And so to me, I was a expert witness to defend graffiti artists in 2011 with the AEG, the Ritz-Carlton, because they lost their artworks. There were huge murals at the Ritz-Carlton, they lost them. So anyhow, these issues, these legal issues that are happening, that are being created like today with the technology, because people can go and take photos in front of a mural, whether it's an Robert Vargas or ManOne, and then promote their brands. And those to me are, very soon we're gonna have this infringement of, your rights. And it's a conversation that we need to have because of technology, these things are changing. And I'm just wondering how long it's going to take before the graffiti artists start suing these influencers for using their artworks for their own commercial benefits. So it's an interesting conversation. I don't know what's coming next.
You want to take that ManOne before I do?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned Kardashians because I had one of them. one of those people took a photo for one of my murals in Hollywood, and it's funny because they don't even tag you. They don't even they're standing in front of it. It would happen to be my piece of art, but it could have been anybody's piece of art, and it's making them look better in this photo, obviously. But then they won't acknowledge you. They won't even give you a tag or anything like that. But imagine if I posted a photo of them somewhere, I'd get sued. It'd be crazy. Right. So, anyways, it is an ongoing thing, and with technology moving so fast, it's very difficult to police. But luckily for in my career, I've been lucky enough to have worked out issues like that with people before, and I know how to protect my rights and as much as I can and everything like that. But the other thing is that now I get hired a lot because
you get promoted by the influencers.
Yeah, because certain brands are like, instead of us trying to find this wall and get permission and all that, why don't we just hire you and we'll pay you to do the wall, and then we'll make a video out of it and we'll post it, or we'll take some photos with our client or a product in front of it or whatever, because they understand the power of authenticity. That's at the end of the day, all these like TikTokers and Instagrammers and all that social media stuff, people can smell a fake, and they can tell when they're BSing and when they're not legit. And so these marketers are always one step ahead of everyone else, and smart and things like that. So they're like, you know what, let's just go to the source. And I know Robert's done tons of cool stuff, so maybe you want to talk about the stuff you've done, Robert.
One, I was just gonna say, I think when you talk about authenticity, and that's obviously something that is I try to adhere to in every single thing that I do on and off the canvas. But the question really becomes is who is the real influencer? There's the influencer there, and then there's a silent influencer, which is actually the artist, right?
Yeah.
The art itself, let's just say, not the artist, but the art itself.
Yeah.
That's the real influencer.
Right.
And especially in something that's with social media, where everything is clickbait, or you have to digest it in 3 seconds. It's all image based. It's all
Mhm.
based on what catches the eye, and that's the reason. It's not what they have to say. It's not what they're promoting. It's literally what they see initially, and that's usually something that's as close to authentic as they can get to.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention something, Isabel, about technology. Last year I painted a mural of Eddie Van Halen at the Guitar Center, and we were still, it was December 2020, January 2021, and we were still pretty much deep in the pandemic before the vaccines had been rolled out, and people weren't able to really, it wasn't like a usual typical unveiling of mine. However, I added an AR component to the mural, where the mural itself activated because people weren't able to see live music for a while. People weren't able to experience that kind of interaction. And I used the technology to advance the mural as a way of activating the actual guitarist, the Eddie Van Halen, so that when people put their pointed their camera phones onto it, you can hear him playing, and he came to life, and his arms moved up and down the mural. So it became a bit of an animation and innovation as a way of not necessarily selling something by putting a QR code up to a mural, but actually enhancing the two-dimensional development of a mural into kind of a three-dimensional plane.
That's
Yeah.
so cool. That's great.
There is a
That-
question in the chat that this kind of answers, but from Janice. Oh, sorry. If Janice is still out there, thanks Janice for attending, and she knows Isabel and Alex, so from the Sepia Collective. And Janice was wondering kind of about this topic we're talking about, whether businesses and real estate are driving the conversation more these days, more than the artistic side. And I think we're kind of speaking to that now.
Exactly. Yeah, we are. Yeah. I think that, Alex, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always two sides to every coin, right? And so I have a lot of really good friends in LA who are developers, and there's so many developers that I meet like every year, and some of them are just really greedy, and some of them are really into the community, and you don't know who you're going to meet. But LA is always developing, LA is always building, so that's never going to stop. So the way I try to approach the airplane, the way I always try to approach it is when I meet developers is, sometimes you have to educate them, because a lot of times it's not that they're bad people, because I think developers do really get a bad rap overall. Like most people, when they think of a developer, like, oh my God, here comes a guy, he's gentrifying the city, he's going to make everything terrible. And yeah, some of them do. But when you meet one of these guys or women or companies or whatever, you have an opportunity as an artist, especially someone who knows the city a lot better than they do most of the time, is to educate them and work with them in a way where you can say, that's cool. I like that you're trying to, bring art to the building and stuff like that, but here's some things you should consider. And this is why, right? And so, for example, we did a project at the Rendon where I was invited to do some art in there, and we're right around the corner from Skid Row, and they were like, oh, you can bring your art and put it in here for like 3 days and do an installation and all. And I was like, I don't see the purpose of me bringing my art and housing it when we have people who are literally unhoused, like across the street. So I invited an artist who at the time was unhoused, and I gave him a studio for a week to work out of, and he created all this artwork.
That was so beautiful.
And so that was like an opportunity, right? When you can work with developers, and it's you're working with them. You're like at you know, trying to educate them that like you know, there is a real community out here, and that art is really going to be important to the placement of that you know, of that building or the renovation of it or whatever, instead of like, you know, being at odds, you know, like obviously we saw what happened in Boyle Heights with all these different galleries, and it was just a mess because these people came into a lot of the community without any introduction, without any wanting to work with people who are already there. And then that's what happens, is you just get like this banging of the minds. And you know, as an artist, we have an opportunity to kind of build bridges, you know, because that's kind of what we are as artists. We're problem solvers by nature. And so if the problem is that this area doesn't have certain things, and then this other person is coming in and they can help bring some of those things, then why not link it up through art? And so I think that's kind of what we do as artists, you know.
That collaborative spirit.
All right.
Well, we've come to the hour of this great conversation, come to the conclusion of it. And I want to thank so much for your work, Isabel, Robert, and ManOne in our community. It speaks to me personally, and it speaks to those of us who live and move through these communities, because just what you mentioned just now, somebody who doesn't live in that community coming through that community is led to a better understanding by the conversation of our pieces. And the protection of them is very important. So I want to thank all three of you for joining us this evening. Edward, could you move to the next slide? Because I want to talk about the project going forward. The last in our series of this 6 months with looking at art in the street is a project for people. We have 8 branches of the Los Angeles Public Library that are going to participate in looking at art in the street with graffiti writing. They'll have a small business card. ManOne was kind enough to do a film to show us the process he uses when he is doing graffiti writing. And he worked from the letter to the ground and the ground to his signature. So we'll have a little workshop where participants on a business card learn to do their initials and put it up in the community to understand the ephemeral nature of street art. They'll put it up, take a picture, go back a week later, see if it stayed up, see if there's comments on it. And we will know because there's art at LAPL on the backside of the card if people want to return it to the library. So that's coming up from June 22nd to June 30th. If you're interested in getting a book list, Isabel and ManOne and Robert all spoke about important issues on preservation and copyright issues and community. And we have a great book list for you, Art at LAPL, and we'll send it out to you. And then we could close with the last slide to say thank you again to our guests, Isabel Rojas-Williams, ManOne, and Robert Vargas, for joining us this evening, looking at art in the street and the marketplace. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank
You guys.
Thank you.